I hope you're well. Thank you so much for joining me today. So this video is going to be my review on The God in the Gwisin by Sophie Kim. I would say if you haven't read The God in the Gummy Hoe by Sophie Kim, don't watch this video unless you want massive spoilers. And this is just because the plot of The God in the Gwisin depends so heavily on what happens at the very end of The God in the Gummio. So even though I did buy my own copy, I did receive this book for free as like an ebook in exchange for an honest review. So I just wanted to thank NetGalley and the publisher Hodder and Stoughton for that opportunity. So with that proviso, let's get into the actual review. So this book follows Sioka, who has been searching for his lost love's reincarnation, and Kiza, who is his reincarnated lost love. A large portion of the story is set on a cruise ship, the HRC Flatliner, which was a really fun way to read it and a really interesting setting, especially for a fantasy and mythology inspired mystery book. Akiza's working on the cruise ship in the medical bay to atone for her actions in a past life, primarily those of Hanny's, who was the pre-reincarnated Kiza. And Kiza wants to be reincarnated again just to start over, just because she's tired of being tired, essentially. So, everybody is on the cruise ship in terms of Sioka's brother, Sioka's therapist, Kiza's friend, somebody else from the last book. It was a lot. It was cool. It was a bit of a reunion. And then some new characters as well. While they're on the cruise ship, Sioka's brother dies, and then he reincarnates as a baby. I'm not quite sure if it's reincarnating as a god, because eventually he will have his own memories. That's not really important to the story. But while this is kind of going on, and while he's trying to reconnect with the reincarnated love of his life, Kiza, and she doesn't really want to have a long-term future with him because she's after reincarnation, and trying to solve his brother's murder, he's also having to babysit his baby brother, and his brother loves to float. So there's a lot going on, but the story does still manage to seem cohesive, and there's a lot of humor in the book, which I really appreciated. So who would I recommend this book to? Firstly, I'd recommend this book to anybody who read The God in the Gummy Hoe and wants to know what happens afterward. A nice, easy reason to read a book that's a sequel. And also, if you're interested in reading a mythology-inspired mystery book that has K-drama vibes and an enemies to lover romance, I'd very much recommend reading The God in the Gummy Hoe if you didn't heed my initial warning of not to watch this. So from a plot perspective, you could read The God in the Gwisin first or instead and still really enjoy it, and you'd be more in line with experiencing the book as Kiza does as opposed to how Sioka does. However, I still recommend reading the first book first, just because I think that this will make the second book read a lot more powerfully emotionally, and you'll feel the gut punches because you're already invested in the characters and the romance, and it gives more weight to a theme or idea that keeps coming back in the book, which is the ship of Theseus problem, just because you as the reader would have more knowledge of the original ship, Hanny. Both books in the series feel quite similar, with the mythology-inspired mystery book that has K-drama vibes, but I would say the romance is quite different in this one. With the first book, The God in the Gummio, Sioka and Hanny, it's an enemies to lovers. They don't really like each other, and they're also kind of enemies in a literal sense because Sioka unknowingly is trying to hunt Hanny and kill her. So there's a lot of tension there. But with The God in the Gwisin, Kiza has already been reincarnated. They've got like their little string attached, which means that they're fated mates. But with the relationship, one of them has already been in a romantic relationship with the other. So Sioka has already been in a relationship with Kiza, but in a past life, which was a really interesting spin on it. And it's a take on a trope that I haven't read before, and it did come off very cute. Primarily because Sioka is very respectful and he makes sure to respect Kiza's boundaries, which made him not creepy, which has been nice. I say the biggest issue I had with the book, if it was really an issue, was that the mystery aspect is very easy to figure out, and this was the only thing that was preventing me from rating this a 5-star. In like a book like this, you need foreshadowing, you need there to be hints, so that it doesn't, like, the kind of reveals don't come out of nowhere. But I feel like it was made way too easy for the reader, and then I was just waiting for ages for the characters to figure out what was going on, and I'm like, come on, we know. And they did not. And that really slowed the book down for me, because that tension just, it just flopped a bit. The tension was not tight tension, it was just like a loose tension. I did kind of figure out the ending for the most part, but I did enjoy it, and it was more just the mystery that it was like, come on, let's go. One thing I really liked about this book, and I know can be something that makes people not want to read a book, is that there is no risk of miscommunication between Hani and Sioka, which was great. And this is because, as part of the string that attaches them, Sioka and Kisa can hear their thoughts, or at least parts of them, through the bond. So while miscommunication as a trope can work and cause tension, a lot of the times it can be very unbelievable and frustrating for the reader. While this bond kind of makes Sioka and Kisa communicate, even just like their raw and unedited thoughts. And I like this because their growing relationship never suffered from the miscommunication trope, and it always felt like it was developing well, but there was still the tension of Kisa wanting to be reincarnated, which would mean that they might never find each other again, which would be very sad. So with all of that, if that is something that sounds interesting to you, I definitely give it a read. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, even with kind of the sagging mystery tension. So now I'm going to go into my writer craft note section. So I am an unpublished writer, but I would really love to be published one day. So when I read a book, I try to be more aware of the author's craft and what I can learn from them. And this book was great for that. For this book, I'm going to be exploring the writing voice and how Kim used themes in The God and the Gwisin. For both, I think she did a really good job and made it an enjoyable reading experience, but also one that made me ask bigger questions. This book is a fantasy book, but the language still feels very modern. It verges closer to urban fantasy. So the first book, The God and the Gumiho, is set in the 1990s, and then the second book is 2025, and the language does reflect that. And it also reflects the setting, and there are times when her writing's really funny just because she's using that modern language and then it kind of contrasting with the kind of mythological element of it, like Sioka not being able to use a phone very well in technology, and that's quite funny. So yeah, it's great. It's done really well. She does do this in other ways as well. So sometimes this is through her word choice. For example, the adjective magnificent in this sentence. So his mind is still worrying, still teetering on the edge of a magnificent mental breakdown. This word choice changes the tone of the sentence from being something very serious and sad to making it more lighthearted, but respectfully, to people who have magnificent mental breakdowns. And it's also, again, because of that contrast, so magnificent and mental breakdown contrasting with each other, and playing on this and even using magnificent to describe the impending mental breakdown makes it sound grand, makes it sound a bit like over the top, and also the contrast can sound bizarre, and done well are really funny. A similar play on contrast, but more playing with the stereotypical kind of cool casual strongman, is this sentence. They're both about Sioka, and he shrugs even though he's preening like a peacock inside. So Sioka is an attractive god and is practically godly royalty. He's effectively immortal, and he cares a lot about his appearance and how he comes across. He also likes to appear a mix of like cool and terrifying. So him preening like a peacock is completely opposite to that casual shrug he had just made before, and to kind of his general ideal demeanor that he would like to portray. And with that, it's funny because of the different portrayals. Importantly, it makes Yoka feel more real, and gives him more of a personality and even potentially a weakness or insecurity, so vanity and how he's perceived, and that very much kind of playing on his mind. Another really funny sentence that I wanted to pick out was from Kiza's perspective. So this was kind of like an add-on to a sentence. So murder mysteries have the potential to be rather fun when you're already dead and can't be murdered again. And it was just kind of like the character kind of introspecting on themselves, on herself. And yeah, it was just such a funny way to phrase it, because usually it's like, oh, like your dead is all bad, you're a ghost, this is the worst thing that could have happened. It's like, actually, I can have fun with this. I don't have to worry about being murdered again because I literally can't be. So that was good. And yeah, so I think thinking about word choice and how to present ideas or questions is important for thinking about your writer's voice and how you want to curate it. And this can obviously depend on the book you're writing or the genre you're writing in, but you don't have to be pigeonholed because, like, um, Sophie Kim's writing in fantasy and still putting all this humor and urban humor in really, really well. But thinking about how you want the reading experience to be and how you want your characters to come across for the reader is really important, although it's not necessarily a quick process. So in Kim's writing, it feels seamless and really well done, but I imagine she had to work really hard and think about it and practice it, just to get her, like, how, just to develop her unique writing style. That is absolutely not anything bad for her. She might just be able to naturally write like that, and that would be amazing. I'm very jealous. But I think sometimes it's, oh, like I should just be able to write like that because I want to be a writer. And it's like, no, it has to be something that's worked at and like actual conscious thought and practice be put in. And another thing that I liked is that she doesn't write super academically. Her writing is very accessible, but it's also still really funny. It moves the plot forward, and while doing all that, it's also asking the reader questions, and making them think about really interesting topics. So with that, it's not like a fully comedy book. Like, it does deal with quite high stakes and like heavy subjects, which I'll get into a bit more very soon with the theme of grief. But there are also absolutely gorgeous sentences that are interspersed in this book. It's a really great balance of comedy, plot, and humor. So this sentence, trying to hate her feels like holding the wind, a faint cool flickering of nothing at all. This sentence helps set the tone of the story at this point, and it gives more character insight into Sioka. And it's also beautifully written. This is Kim using simile to describe a feeling so that it's more easily understood. And it's also quite tactile for the reader, evoking the wind and then the absence of it for the reader. And also just portraying Sioka as, even though he's like all this cool god who's very grumpy and like comes across as, I mean, he's not, which I think helps endear him to the reader. And then it also makes sure that this absolutely gorgeous simile is associated with him for the reader, because he is vain, but he's also capable of depth and beauty and respectfulness to other people. So as I mentioned, we're going to be moving on to looking at how Sophie Kim explores grief in this book, which is a major theme. Just as a little aside, I absolutely love the fated mates trope. That can be the only thing that I know about a book, and I'm interested in picking it up already. They can all feel a bit samey, and from a craft perspective, I can see how it could be difficult to create tension within the relationship with this trope. They're meant to be together, so that kind of relationship, like in a romance, you're like, oh, are they gonna get together? Yes, because it's a fated mates trope, usually. So it's like, what other barriers can you put in? I've seen tension arise in these from only one fated mate knowing that they're fated mates, and sometimes the character knows, and sometimes they discover it as the reader does. And that in its own right is a type of miscommunication, which can be fun, but can feel very frustrating, like I said. But in The God and the Gwisin, both characters know that they're fated mates because of that string, so there's like a tactile, visual representation that cannot be misinterpreted essentially. And then this thread passes those emotions and thoughts down the bond, so there's absolutely nowhere to hide. And where a lot of the tension comes in the relationship stems from a very intriguing question, which is what happens when a romantic partner gets reincarnated. So this is a quote that I thought was like, oh, a bit of a gut punch if you've read the first book. And then yeah, I thought it was just really succinctly written. So she's his lover and a stranger all at once, because they're fated mates, but he doesn't know her because she's not Hanny. And then this is also further complicated by Kiza being the one who's mated with Sioka, as opposed to Hanny being fated mate to him, because they originally had the relationship. And I'd say the reader has already experienced the relationship with Hanny and Sioka in The God and the Gummy Hoe, with all of the fun and heartbreak that came with it. And so Sioka is carrying this grief into the story because he's lost Hanny. And he's really excited for Kiza because it's Hanny, but then it's obviously not Hanny, so that just kind of complicates it. In The God and the Gwisin, both Kiza and Sioka know that they're fated mates, but Sioka has that additional complication of having been in the relationship with Hanny, and Kiza is her own person, but there's glimpses of Hanny in Kiza, and she recognizes them from what other people kind of say. And Kiza also has insecurities around this, and she's almost grieving for the person that she was before she was reincarnated, and she feels inadequate to her in a lot of ways. She also has her own self-worth and knowledge. So this quote I wanted to pull out: she's not at all sure what Hanny would say, but Kiza isn't Hanny, a fact that she suspects Sioka is becoming increasingly disappointed in. And as a reader, I feel like I lost Hanny, and I did in The God and the Gummy Hoe. And that was especially from getting to know her in the previous book. And while the book was kind of going, I shared in Sioka's excitement for him to find her, even with the knowledge that she'd be different, but I still kind of have that, oh, I miss Hanny. I do think that it helps that Kiza is a nice character. She's caring, she's hardworking, and has some similarities to Hanny, so it'd be like Hanny's entirely gone. And there is kind of regularly that reminder for the reader and for Sioka that Kiza is her own person, and I think Sophie Kim does a really good job in acknowledging that and respecting that while still respecting Hanny's memory. And I say that the theme of grief, and I guess a bit of identity as well, is explored through the Ship of Theseus question, which is, if a ship has had all of its parts replaced over time, is it still the same ship as when it was originally? And Sioka and Hanny do have different opinions, and those opinions do kind of change over time, but I thought it was a really cool way to kind of visualize it for the reader, and they could keep going back to it without it feeling repetitive, just to kind of touch base with their feelings and kind of their wishes, and make that more accessible for the reader, because it is, I think, quite a difficult thing to get across well. But Sophie Kim did do it really well by just kind of bringing the reader gently back to that Ship of Theseus question, while also kind of doing all the extra bits and more, to be honest, that I said above. And just because the story explores it consistently in the book, that question is always looming, and it's just raised to the reader really clearly, and it's relevant and evolving through the story, and it was interesting to follow it, and I think it's for an aspiring author to learn from if they're trying to look at how a theme or a question can be followed through a story. Thank you so much. This was my review on The God and the Gwisin by Sophie Kim. Please let me know if you have read it or if you're planning on reading it and kind of what you thought about it. I absolutely love the play on the fated mates trope and how she brought something that's like a trope that's really popular right now and made it new. I think she did a really good job. And yeah, just let me know your opinions, and I will see you in the next video.